Oh, there we go. Uh, Trying to find one. Here we go. This is what the corner of 2nd and Main looked like in 1889. The building you see in front of you is the Verrazano Simpson building. Right now it's like the parking lot for Windcrest Apartments, if that helps. What I find interesting about this building is it was one of the very first to be built after the downtown fire of 1862. And in 1877, it burned out. It burned completely out and was rebuilt. The walls were still intact, but the built insides had to be rebuilt. It's especially dear to me because it is built by Verrazano Simpson. Remember that name. I think I'm going to start saying his name like Verrazano Simpson. I'll work on it, I promise. This guy was a turd. He horsewhipped his wife out on Lafayette Street and down by the levee. And he, cracked that whip, and he got her pretty good 2 or 3 times. But, that's not good. I'm not trying to condone it or anything like that. She divorced him. She took him to the cleaners. He was selling off businesses by the time she got done with him. So I'm not going to feel sorry for Ann Monahan Simpson, but Verrazano got elected mayor 4 times in succession after he did that. These are the kinds of people you had doing things in Winona. See if I can. That's another Slade Block Bijou Theater, where Mainstream Pawn Shop is now. This is the former site of the Federal Bakery building. Judy? Well, I was telling Dick Dahl about this earlier this week, and he said, that building, oh my God. He started talking about the smells of downtown. The smells of downtown Winona. And I never thought about that. But he said that you knew that, you're walking, you could smell the Federal Bakery. You could smell the restaurants when they were making fish. You could smell, and it was just like an added dimension of Winona that nobody ever talks about. And, well, I'm not from here, and I have no sense of smell. Okay, here we go. This, of course, is the steak shop building next to the steak house or whatever. There she is. Okay, that's the Arches. Here's the Winona Athletic Club. Oh, crap. It's not giving me the big one. Okay, this is the Polish Embassy, folks. It was built in 1931 at the corner of 5th and Mankato. And it was the place for Polish men to hang out. The Polish women could belong to the auxiliary and come to some of the clubs. The women weren't allowed to join until the 50s. I'm going to keep going. I'm looking for a certain church. I got all sorts of these damn pictures. Okay, come on, church. Well, that's nuts. Here's St. Casimir's back in the day. This one. The Winona Universalist Church. They had a wooden church designed by Charles Mayberry. And then the whole movement just evaporated. Showing you that one. Oh. This? Oh, this has been knocked down. This was fish. I want to say something like like Johnson and 7th or something. I was just shocked to find out it had existed. Here's Philharmonic Hall, burned down in 1967. You've been in this building, haven't you? Gone but not forgotten. I kind of like that one. Pardon? Yep. It is the parking lot of the Eagles Club. This is the former Merchants Hotel at 4th and Walnut. Okay, and it's going to be my last one, too. It's looking a little rough. Does anybody in this room remember this building? Jonelle, did you ever sell this building once? Lois? It's a corner of the Huff House. In 1889, the Huff House had to be demolished, but it could not be demolished as a unit and used to make, a separate hotel. It could be sold only in quarters. It was moved to 4 different locations in Winona. And the last surviving one was the Merchants Hotel at 4th and Walnut, demolished in the right around the 1960s or something like that. And that was the old, well, that's what we have of the old Huff Hall. And that's all the pictures I have to show for you right now. Merle, if you're ready. Yep, I figure, we got Lena out there. We got the Huff Hotel. We got 1889. Well,
some of us folks got all sorts of problems. Turning on a microphone is, every week is a new day. So this first story is called Grandpa John. Grandpa John was my great-grandfather. And when I started hearing voices and I started hearing things, cemeteries always have been a special place for me because that's the home of where I come from. That's where my myths come from. That's where my people come from. I mean, growing up, you learn on the kitchen table, and you learn with different aunts and uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers. And so I wrote this story about Grandpa John. Great Grandpa John. I had no more taken 2 steps into the cemetery when Great Grandpa John and Grandma Lucy showed up. This was my first time meeting Grandma, as I've lost touch with some family folk. She was right special because Grandpa had some juice in him. We got buried down by the creek closer. I used to say it might save us a few years getting to our final destination. But headed downhill forever, family roots. My great-great-grandpa got me started with my story writing. Of course, he died in 1920. And I'm old, but not quite that old. His own little world. He'd get talking and I'd get to listening. He liked messing with my thinking, just like my uncle. I had a beautiful wife, he told me. I moved here after the Civil War. I wore my uniform proud till my dying day. I lost my leg. The Pottsylvania Courthouse. I'd seen and heard Gettysburg. Smelled it from a ways away, 4th Vermont. Just a day's ride outside of Gettysburg. We were the next line of defense should Lee have broken through at Cemetery Ridge. Never saw so many buzzards flying and then the smell over those next few days. But hearing a man scream as they sawed off his leg with only whiskey to stop the pain will break most any man. So I carried my half-dead leg with me until 1900. In 1900, my leg had started giving out. Had to chop it off. Green, you know. I forgot the doctor's name. He had an office on 2nd Street. when the second street wasn't so smooth. He gave me a couple shots of something blue, second floor way in the back. Anyway, one of my proudest moments was when the Grand Army of the Republic met here in 1900. It was a gathering of men who shared a Civil War experience. To a man, we hoped it would be the last war. It wasn't 2 weeks after my leg got cut off that the meeting started, and some of my drinking buddies got a Winona Wagon Works wagon and picked me up, bed and all. Plopped me right down, 407 West Sanborn, and I drank myself senseless. I'm surprised nobody died as we remembered the stories and the times. Sadness and fun all in the same day. Company K of the 1st Minnesota was revered in northern circles, and old war historians from the South marveled at the courage of the outfit that turned Lee back south, Cemetery Ridge. I know none of us were ever the same after that conflict. Walk gently now. A whole lot of folks want to tell their story. So that was the story of my grandfather. And, he somehow, he overcame, and he survived, and he had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And they come out all right. So for the last month, I've really struggled writing. I don't know if it's the temperature. Usually I'll put out 20, 30 stories a month. Get up in the morning and start. I'm a pecker, you know. I hit the keys like that, both hands. Boom, 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 boom. I beat up my word processor something fierce. I mean, I pound my stories into that thing. But this weather, where it's 30s and it's kind of rainy and it's cold. Oh, give me winter. Give me a foot of snow or 3 feet of snow. I'm much warmer than this stuff. And I used to like it. When I was a kid, I liked spring because I knew baseball, being outside was right around the corner. We didn't have fancy coats and things like today's generation did back then. So it was hard kind of to get bundled up and warm. You can stay pretty cozy nowadays. So anyway, I had to get away from Winona. Sometimes you start hearing the echoes going back and forth and back. People talking about the same stuff they talked about yesterday and 2 years ago, 5 years ago. You don't get nowhere. You got to get out and hear different voices. You got to get out and talk to different people. You got to get out and feel a little discomfort, a little unease to get yourself better. So I got a couple stories tonight. A couple stories that I've written recently that talked about this time. In fact, I just finished one this afternoon. I find it hit 60 degrees out and I could feel words start coming out my fingers. See, when I was little, I couldn't get the stuff out of me. It was in me. And it was like it was blocked. And I couldn't write like most people got a pen and paper and things. Well, when stories start coming out my fingertips, my fingers get all crinkled. I can't get them out. So of all the problems modern technology has caused us, the word processor has been a godsend. I mean, it has. I mean, some of you have read my books. Some of you have heard my stories. Can you imagine carrying some of that stuff around in your head? Every day, every day. And when I'm able to get it on my fingers, I'm happy and I'm healthy. I feel alive. It's like a great painter. You know, you got to find that zone, that quiet space, and then it pops out. So without this bad boy, I just might be locked up in St. Peter or somewhere else that I'd probably feel right at home. The nurses, when I worked in psychiatry, used to tell me, Merle, we like working with you. We can't tell you the difference between you and a schizophrenic. And they had no idea. Because I kept that. That was one of those things that you sweep under the rug. You don't tell people, generally, first off, that you suffer from schizophrenia. And I used to think it was a real suffer, and I don't anymore. I'm too old to care much about nothing. So I let myself express myself through that. Enough of my story. In these dark days of spring, when the clouds never leave and the winter gods refuse to give up their grip on the cold air, the dead people turn gloomy. Folks ain't necessarily happy with all the disorder in today's world. They are wondering if we are fooling ourselves. Sometimes they start talking, I have to get out of town. Living in the small valley amongst the echoes of repeat after me. Where on a guy who likes pissing in the wind? Politics in America has turned as people argue about a world turned upside down. So I called my friend who owns a cabin surrounded by over 100 acres of hardwoods, and I settled in to clear my head. I needed groceries, so I headed to the small towns where everybody stares as you walk through the aisles, wondering who you are related to, or why else would you stop in this hole-in-the-wall town where everybody knows everybody and their business too? No reason to be there, and I couldn't help but think if my skin were dark that the sheriff or chief of police would meet me at the door. The gods roared that I should stay in the cabin as the drizzle came down cold and the temperature stood 7 or 8 degrees above freezing. So I bought my groceries and headed back to the cabin to think and rest for the next calamity to rear its ugly head. Trees have always brought me comfort, rest for weary eyes that read too much, and shelters from the noises of living. I always used to admire our presidents who used Camp David to talk with other world leaders amongst the trees of wisdom. Environment plays such a role in who we are, psychologists say. I hear the voices of my conservative forefathers asking what happened to free market Republicans, and I hear the echoes wondering who these poses are that call themselves Republican today. Those voices follow me as I try to let go of my thinking. The man wearing orange makeup and a hairpiece goes golfing as people's fortunes slip and slide away in the shrinking economy. Greed, greed, my granny says. It always goes too far. That's how those deadly sins work, and I hear my church and roots say folk wisdom should not be forgotten. For 2 days I rested and caught up on my sleeping. I've been trapped in a writer's block as the words wouldn't come out. I sat and prayed for the sun gods to shed their light, hoping my tiredness would disappear. Time for a nap. And I'm going to read one more and turn it back to Joe. That dark side of living can't be seen from the interstate or on a jet. You got to drive on the river roads and see the abandoned towns. Old American and its faded story, peeling white painted houses and rusty old farm implements. They all tell a story, and on this dark and cold rainy spring day, most of the townsfolk weren't in the best of moods. George and Esther were yelling at each other, and most of the cemetery had their eyes glued in their direction. They didn't say a word, and so I stood and listened. What the hell, I thought, my kind of heaven. They used to argue like cats and dogs down at Josie's bar every Friday night. He'd load up on bourbon and she'd be drinking her Tom Collins and flashing her glittery jewelry. Browbeat him, I tell you, she said. Alice, we are talking to a living man. He doesn't need to catch up on the latest gossip. Name's Harry. I used to own the lumber store. Long gone. Ain't nothing but rattling in that storefront for darn near 50 years. It was sad to see this town die. The church got most everyone's money, and that bell ain't been rung in 20 years. We had a one-room schoolhouse I heard coming from the small stone, buried over on the far side of the cemetery. Best years of my life. Then the flu bug hit in 1921, and 7 of us 12 students died. Sick in the morning, dead by afternoon. Small towns carry stories of long ago times. The storefronts were once a dream of a better life. The town playground seems empty with that old swing set sitting idle. Without kids, there are no tomorrows. When hope dies, the person's heart soon follows, and the days get counted until you become a member of the local cemetery association. You can hear the rumblings of life gone bad, cousins who got too close and their offspring who struggle with the encounter their entire lives. Bankers and old church folks sweep the real stories under the rug, and the next generation don't learn. I was under a quarter-day tank as I headed home. Quick trips are not seen in these back roads of time, and so I felt a bit nervous, but the hybrid we drive carried us a good long ways. Restaurants and coffee shops shuddered as I meandered through the coulees. Eventually, I ran into downtown Homeland, which had a bustling bakery called the Omega Bakery, and I filled my sweet tooth. Downtown Homeland is showing life, new development, and there was a continuous flow of customers as I munched. Young owners starting out who took the risk of leaving what they knew to create a better life for themselves as the darkness of COVID took hold. America at its finest. I finished my cookie and the sun peeked its head as I neared Perot State Park. I got out near the lodge and walked down by the river, feeling myself breathe as the gods of winter backed off and I could feel my depression leaving.
Thank you very much. Let me just flip through a couple more of these pictures real fast and can find you something exciting to look at. There's the Merchants Hotel. I love this. This is poop. This is one of my favorites. I love this picture because it shows you the fabled 2nd Street, or as it was called in Winona, 2 Street. I learned my first Winona term. I never heard the name word 2 Street before. I feel like I'm a real Winona now. I call your attention to the building over there, the red building at left. That is one of the offices known to be one of the residents of Winona's iconic madam, Queenie Levac. There is a tendency to say, okay, all the prostitutes were out on 2nd Street. They were led by Queenie Levac. We kept them all nice and cordoned off. I'm here to tell you, and Merle will confirm this, that they ran prostitutes anywhere you could find a building with private access and room enough for a bed. Okay? And probably, I wouldn't say the term whoremonger. I guess I just did. The National Hotel, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, the National Hotel is off to your right, built in 1916. And I'm finding out that there is no end to the sleaze that went on in this building. And when in 1942 they put up the interstate bridge, it went right by. And as Merle was kind enough to inform me, you can walk. I mean, smile, you're on candid camera. And I think to myself, this is really Winona to me, not the fancy Bunnell College, Bunnell building stuff and lumber people building stuff. This story is called It Ended with a Bang. I premiered it. It had its world premiere at Callista Court last week, and they didn't run me out of there. Thanks, buddy. I saw that, David. You are a good man. Dig, if you will, the picture of the 4th of July in Winona, 1862. Yeah, there was a Civil War going on. The sawmills were just hanging on too, but the grain elevators were stuffed with southwest Minnesota's golden bounty. Southeastern Minnesota was the granary of the United States in 1862. Not much planning celebration going on for the 4th of July 1862 because there wasn't really a heck of a lot to celebrate when one half of the Union is trying to secede from the other half. Winona wanted to move up the pecking order of rivertown cities because rivertown cities were and are competitive. La Crosse had been around forever. Winona was founded in 1855. The city fathers of Winona got an idea. Let's throw a party for the 4th of July. Fireworks, marching bands, orchestras, the whole 9 yards. What the heck? Word traveled far up and down the river, from steamboat to steamboat, and pretty soon the Winona Fire Company, wasn't a fire department, which had 2 steam pumpers, invited the Pioneer Fire Company of Winona, of La Crosse, Wisconsin, to come up on a steamboat and enjoy the lovely 4th of July, courtesy of their friends in Winona. And that's just what they did. One of the La Crosse newspapers whined about it. Oh, the Winonians. That's what they called us back then, Winonians. The Winonians are going to groan at us. The other newspaper said, hey, this is great. This is wonderful. Let's bring them up. And here's what happened. They rented a steamboat, the Frank Steele. It was a Minnesota River steamer, and maybe, say, like 8 o'clock in the morning on the 4th of July, 1862, the firemen and their fire wives got on the boat. Then the 10th Regiment Marching Band got on the boat, and they had a nice 4-hour ride up to Winona listening to marching band music. When they came to Winona, they were greeted by practically everybody in the city of Winona. There were marshals wearing fancy uniforms, there were delegations, there were marching bands, there were choirs of little kids with flags, and all of that good stuff. They were taken to the Huff House. The firemen and the firewives were taken to the Huff House. And this is 1862. For it was the only place in town for a lovely dinner. And then they had firemen's contests. I've never been to a fireman's picnic, but apparently they have blanket tosses and they have ladder climbing contests and hose contests. People like to watch firemen having a picnic. And they did that. And they had a dance in one of the halls with a lovely dinner. And then they had some fireworks. Everybody had a fantastic time in Winona. Once the fireworks were put out, maybe about 10 o'clock, 10:30, they didn't say, They make sure that nothing's on fire. Then the firemen and their firewives get onto the boat Frank Steele, where they found that one of their crew members had gotten stabbed during the afternoon. I mean, just for fun. And that they gave 3 rousing cheers for the city of Winona, which were rah, 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 followed by something called a tiger at the end. I always wondered what a tiger was, and it turns out to be a distinctive thing that a group of people does after they have said rah, rah, and rah. You know, we would go like rrr, or yow, or meow, or we're from Winona, darn it, or whatever else we would say. The editor of the La Crosse newspaper, Marcus Brick Pomeroy, was very impressed by Winona's show of hospitality. Brick Pomeroy, the newspaper editor of La Crosse, was a tough person to impress. The one person he hated most in the whole world was Abraham Lincoln. There are collections of evil things this guy used to say about Abraham Lincoln that are remembered for 150 years. And even he thought it was a great idea. But here's what happened, or as Paul Harvey would say, still got it, Tanya. Okay, Tanya and I were colleagues for 97 years together. And here we go. Brick Pomeroy posted in his newspaper, the La Crosse Weekly Democrat, that he had warm praise for the city of Winona's hospitality. He commended the Pioneer Fire Company and the other travelers from La Crosse for doing their town credit. He commended Captain Newton of the ship Frank Steele. He said the excursion was a success. But here's what he also said at the end. Only one regret rests with the participators in the festivities of the 4th from this city, and that is that so sad a casualty should so soon fall upon the enjoyments of the delay. The pioneers most sincerely regret that they could not have been there in the hour of need to render them aid and assistance. What? 1 o'clock that morning, while the firemen and their firewives are all on the boat Frank Steele heading home for La Crosse, downtown Winona burned down. Some idiot with a flare, not with a flare gun, but with some matches or something, started a fire which burned the entire wooden downtown core. 90% of downtown Winona was burned in one morning. The firemen were all bagged. There wasn't much they could do. There wasn't much anybody could do. It was a $500,000 hit, which is which is basically $50 million today. May even be $500 million. I have no idea. 18% of it was insured. That's it. The fire was stopped at Main Street. It didn't get any farther west than Main Street. So the Huff House was still in one place. It's going to be ready for whatever it's going to be doing next. There is no fancy ending to the story. The working title is It Ended with a Bang. But it did. They wake up on the 5th of July. The newspaper is printed up in St. Paul for the next 3 months because there is no downtown Winona. Somehow, this city crawled back the way it always does. And I don't know why, but it always does. Thank you very much.
computers sometimes have a mind of their own.
Try cursing at it.
So this story, I wrote it a couple days ago. And again, it's about me trying to get out of a writer's block. Just that sometimes stuff don't flow. And so this is part of that story. I've been stuck in my writing. It seems to happen every spring. The lingering spring season is rapidly becoming my least favorite season. The weather god likes teasing me, and I hear my old folks saying, my joints get sore and my bones creak, and my thinking becomes disconnected. Those clouds throw a veil of gloom in my head, and the glorious sun god only peeks into my seeing as he hides and lets the clouds have their day. Stories build inside me that I can't get out of my head. Depression rings an ugly bell. I'm no spring chicken, but I've learned if I sit long enough, the gloom will cast its ugly shadow. I get stuck in my writing chair, not being able to do much of anything. Most months I can write and the words flow, but in late spring the fingers, the heart, and the mind shut down. We went on small road trips and visited small towns. It wasn't the best walking weather, but we found eating spots in small towns, and sometimes just sat and listened to old brick buildings and the people who used to frequent them. I like to hear voices not often heard that tell the story beyond the great and the glorious. My kind of people is I stop into one-person bakeries and coffee shops where they name their cookies Grandma Judy's chocolate chip cookie. So good, right on the main drag of Chatfield. I grew up on Tushner's hot dogs, and I always figured it was fortunate in having done so, and I thought about that old Winona neighborhood where old man Tushner lived and worked his craft. Hot dogs don't taste like they used to, and they had some Wagyu hot dogs in the freezer box that elicited memories of long ago. I ate them later that evening. We got out to Preston and ate frog legs at that restaurant on the hill. That's some good cooking that goes far beyond normal cooking, as their steak and burgers are mighty tasty and beyond ordinary. Sometimes you got to get out and see things different than the echoes of same-day living. One day I wandered over to watch the fast-pitch women's softball game of the Cardinals of St. Mary's. I'd taken a gummy and had walked over to the ball field. Those girls can flat out play. And that's coming out of the mouth of a guy who once played baseball on that hill up by the old Beck Mansion as you head out of Winona town. A nationally ranked team right in our backyard, playing in a picturesque setting. And the sun god smiled right pretty. When the temp hit 60, the words started flowing. See you tomorrow night at the library. And then I finally got him out of me. I could start feeling better. The sun came out. It hit 60. Oh, glorious 60. There's no place better in the whole wide world than Winona on a spring day. And all the dead people are out walking. They're out talking, all old neighbors and new neighbors and young neighbors. People you haven't seen for ages are walking the streets. So I wrote a story about my favorite Winona character of all time, Lena Weinberg.
You did.
I did. Oh. She'd been dead a good long while. And it had been a few years since I had run into Miss Beulah Norton. She remained shy and demure, as she approached me, and I sat down on the stoop of the Hannibal house on 5th Street, the Hannibal Choate house on 5th Street. Lena Weinberg was the talk of the town in my growing up days. Those two brothers of mine, Herbert and Matthew, scared me with their tales of Lena Weinberg. Every time those floorboards creaked or the furnace rumbled, my two older brothers would make a crack about Lena coming to get me. Everybody in town knew you didn't mess with Lena. At the corner of 5th and Huff, across the street from the Huff-Lamberton house, stands a mostly empty block with only the original Andrew Drew house standing on that parking lot. That was where Winona's finest mansion once stood. It was the home of Matthew Norton of the Laird Norton Company, which was the largest of the Winona lumber companies. William Laird and James Norton were the other two driving forces of the company, with Laird being the man who built Winona's beautiful public library. Despite all of their money, and Laird Norton money is still talking today, over 100 years after the death of Matthew Norton Sr., the families encountered serious tragedies. James Norton became blind, and his son was born blind. William Laird lost his son at an early age. And of course, the Matthew Norton family lost two sons, and their loss affected Beulah the rest of her days. Those were some of my last happy moments. Those brothers of mine scared me with their legendary tales of Lena Weinberg. All the neighbor kids would gather at the tennis courts on 5th and Huff, located right next to Hannibal Choate's place. And we'd tell stories to pass the time. Just before bedtime, they'd make up some story, and I'd have a hard time sleeping. Matthew and Herbert were close as brothers can be, but their being was anything but the same. Mom would sometimes hear them and tell them to shush. You all know how well that works. Dad was all business, hardly smiled except when I sat on his lap or he went fishing. He loved that river. And I guess that smile he had comes from being the youngest daughter. Of course, after Lena got murdered at the intersection of 4th and Johnson, the brothers got worse with their talk of spirits, as if they thought spirits would somehow be seeking revenge. They had no idea, and until this day, I carry a thought it was the rising of the Native Americans coming to get us. Church musings, you know. There were a few things that distracted Dad in his pursuit of more money. My mind changed after my two brothers died. I felt like my heart had stopped living and my life had gone from full and delightful to empty and alone. Life didn't turn out like I thought it would, and I'm sure Lena would say the same. But when she got killed, the people who would know became quiet, and I could almost hear the story being swept under some awfully nice rugs. And growing up in Winona, you'd hear these myths, these stories. I had an uncle, and he could tell stories that could make you laugh, make you cry, make you feel, and make you believe. And then there was the other side of him, which closed up didn't let the things out, was withdrawn. But when he would show that moment of light, when he'd show that absolute focus, he could play with the crowd and with the people around the coffee table. And he never had any breakfast I ever saw him eat other than black coffee and Camel cigarettes. And he'd have those stained yellow fingertips, constant smoking. And I'm an old man now. But it's those quiet moments. It's those people that you meet that kind of just push you, help you, get you to see a little different, that still talk to me all these years. Some of my old teachers, 50, 60 years ago. It's like they were dancing. They were dancing with my mind, waking my mind up, playing with my mind. And Winona was full of these everyday people, making a difference. But I never knew the connection of Beulah Norton and Lena Weinberg till about 10:30 this morning when I started writing this. And thank you.
Thank you, Merle.
Huh? Yeah.
Okay, we've got. That's a nice one. I'll leave that one up. What the hell? Oh, no. There was a plan.
Wasn't Winona cool back in the day?
Yes.
I mean, all of it was part of us.
Yes.
All right. Okay, well, Lucas, I want to thank you for helping me print out my stuff. And in the grand tradition of, I pitched out a 3,300-word manuscript on Tuesday morning over at the History Center because I couldn't read it. I'll bring it home with a tribute, a simple, heartfelt tribute to St. Stanislaus Kostka School. A subject near and dear to my mother's heart. And as long as I'm telling you that story, I should tell you that yesterday was Mom's birthday. Mom would have been 92 yesterday. Her name was Laura Bambanek. She was born at the corner of 5th and Caramona, right across from St. Stanislaus Kostka School. She grew up right across the street from the school where she would attend until her graduation from 8th grade until in 1947. Again, she lived across the street. It was like Fort Bambanek. We came to that house for all events every year. So I grew up seeing St. Stan's School all the time, too. It didn't look like that to me. It was knocked down when I was 5 years old in 1966. However, I recall talking to my mom about it, and my mom, whose childhood education with the Good Sisters was not always happy. Let's put it that way. My cousins all went to Catholic school except for my brother, sister, and I. We didn't go to school, Catholic school, because our mom went to Catholic school. She was upset when they knocked it down. She was really bothered. She made Dad throw one of the old school desks in the back of our crappy old car and we toted it from Winona all the way back down to Oak Creek, Wisconsin, because that's how my mom felt about St. Stan's School. I don't have any more pictures. Mark, you have posted some things that I can't unsee, and I drive by it every once in a while. I just want to say that this is a sad story. We lost St. Stanislaus Kostka School. It was a victim of it wasn't needed anymore. It was riddled with asbestos. It cost it was not worth the cost of remediation, and it was time. Merle and I have both served on Winona's Heritage Preservation Commission. In fact, we have a legend now that basically I moved here because Merle wanted to get off of the committee because I am his replacement. And I'm here to tell you that sometimes the buildings have to come down. No matter what your attachment is, there just was not any more use for this poor building. And had I successfully downloaded my PowerPoint onto the thumb drive, I would have shown you glorious pictures of the great hopes that were put into the building of the 1905 St. Stan's School. The fundraising that went into the 1953 edition. In 1966, the whole thing was redone yet again with a cornerstone box and all of that. I see this and I think about the people who contributed to building this church, the little kiddies. I mean, you taught there, didn't you, Nancy? I mean, anybody? Do we have any alums in the room? It is Fifth and Caramona. If you go across the street, that's the Mary Twice store. Okay, and on this corner, there used to be an their congregational church or something like that was knocked down. And on the far corner, if you walked across that crosswalk far to your left, you would get to my mom's house. There was no really any need for the old Milwaukee Road Freight House either. The railroad couldn't get any use out of it. It wasn't used to build anything out of. Sometimes we just have to let the buildings go. That said, as somebody whose motto is gone but not forgotten, it really hurts me to say this, but when it's time, it's time. Thank you very much. I'm done talking, Merle. Okay, any questions, comments, complaints, anything? We take anything. 66. 66. 66. 66. SIXTY. The East End Rec Center, you keep walking down, that's Caramona, that's Fifth. Keep walking down Fifth, and you will come up on the East End Rec. Pardon? Uh-huh.